And tonight's Parsha class is on borrowing. Parshas Boy, it's on borrowing. If you were here last week, Sunday, I gave you a Parsha, my first class I gave since I came back after my illness. So I gave you a Chumash on Shmois, even though last week was Ve'era, but it was Sunday, so I sort of snuck backwards. And I went through the entire dialogue between Hashem and Moshe that goes on in Kapitel Gimel and Dal in the Chumash. If you remember last week, I went through the whole thing. And of course, one of the parts of the dialogue that's interesting is that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Eibishter gives Moshe Rabbeinu a summary of everything that's going to happen, from the beginning to the end, at one point. If you remember last week's class, it was 12 points. The 6th point was a summary of the entire event. It starts with Moshe going to Pari and Pari not listening, and then the Makis. But it finishes very emphatically with the idea of the Yidden taking Rechush Gadol, Jewish people taking great wealth. The Jewish people leave Egypt, they're going to take great wealth. Now, of course, this goes back to Parshas Lech Lecha, the Bris Bein HaPesurim, where Hashem tells Avraham Avinu, when Avraham Avinu was 70 years old, that I'm making a covenant with you, I'm making a pact with you, a covenant, a bris. And as part of the bris, he tells him, Avraham Avinu is having a nevuah, and all of a sudden the nevuah turns terribly dark. Terribly dark. He has a vision of Alakus, and suddenly he sees terrible, terrible darkness. Darkness that's upsetting and frightening and disappointing. And the Eibishter tells him this is Golus. Or more specifically, like we know from the Midrash, it's all the 4 Golias or the 5 Golias. And the famous quote in the Pasuk is, Yodei Teida, you should know, Ki ger yezarach eretz leilahem, your children are going to be strangers. They're going to be aliens. To quote the Maimon in the morning, they're going to be Ivrim. And the land is not theirs. Va'avadom v'inu eisam abba me'eshana. They're going to be slaves, and they're going to be abused, they're going to be tortured for 400 years. 400 years. Then it says, V'games hagoya shayavedu dononoichi. The nation which is going to slave the Jewish people is going to be punished. And then it finishes with the words, the Jews are going to leave with great wealth. That's how the Parsha finishes, in Lech Lecha. This is what Eibishter tells Avraham Avinu. Now, of course, the first big observation is Jews were not slaves for 400 years. They were only in Egypt for 210 years. And of those 210 years, only 116 years was slavery. And of those 116 years of slavery, it took 30 years to manipulate the Yidden into a position of subordination. So the actual slavery is only 86 years. Which is 86. But it was plenty. The suffering was gefährlich. And the Eibishter tells him, I'm going to punish Egypt. So of course you have it all kinds of, the Rambam brings it, in Hilchos Tshuva, and many people have asked the question. If Hashem wants Mitzrayim to punish the Jews, why is he punishing Mitzrayim? If the Eibishter wanted Egypt to enslave and to torture the Jewish people, why is he punishing them? And there's different answers. One answer is there's a Yochid and a Rabbim. The community of Egyptians had to punish the Jew, but you didn't have to volunteer for the job. Another answer is you had to do the job. No one said you had to enjoy it. You had to enjoy the job, do the job. No one said you had to do it behidur. You had to do it extra good. And the Mitzrayim enslaved the Jewish people. We was extra good. So for all of these reasons, they were punished. And they're going to leave with great wealth. Thank you very much. The Gemara says, you come to a man who's been in prison for 40 years or 50 years and says, tomorrow you could leave. Or you could stay a little while longer and I'll give you a stipend, I'll give you a check, I'll give you something. The guy's going to say, I want to get out 1 minute sooner, don't give me nothing, let me go. Here there's a situation where the Jewish people were slaves, the slavery is over, they're leaving as free people, and the Eibishter has a cheshbon of Avraham Avinu. That the Jewish people have to leave with great wealth. So in our Parsha there are 4 psukim that speak to this story. That when the Jews left Egypt, they had to leave Egypt with great wealth. Why? Not because the Jews necessarily wanted it, because the Eibishter made a promise to Avraham Avinu 400 years before, literally, that they would take wealth. 430 years, literally. 1 second. Okay, go ahead, talk.
Didn't that wealth also just belong to them? Like, should
Because of the suffering itself.
Because of Yosef?
That's a different. Yosef is nicht as a poshet, because Yosef didn't raise the money for himself. Yosef worked for the Pharaoh. Yosef was an agent of the king. Right? Yosef was the assistant king. He wasn't the king. It wasn't his wealth. But okay, there's all kinds of ways. Give us a few minutes. I'm going to read the 4 psukim. The first pasuk is Kapitel Yud Aleph, pasuk Beis. Hashem is speaking to Moshe and he says, Daber no, speak please. V'aznei ha'am, in the ears of the people. V'yishalu ish me'es re'eyu, they should borrow one from his, there means his friend. V'isha me'es re'usa, and every woman from her female friend. Kli kesef v'klei zahav, silver utensils and gold utensils. The next pasuk says, Vayitein Hashem es chen ha'am b'nei Mitzrayim. The Eibishter gave chen. What does chen mean? Grace, charm. All of a sudden, the Mitzrayim liked the Jews. And because they liked the Jews, they were prepared to give them the wealth. God, moreover, Ha'ish Moshe, the man Moshe Rabbeinu himself, Gadol Miyed B'Eretz Mitzrayim, was very great. He was very well respected in the land of Egypt. Be'enei Avdei Farei, in the eyes of the slaves of the Pharaoh, Uve'enei Ha'am, in the eyes of the people. So the Parsha says, Hashem tells Moshe, remind the Yidden what I told them in the very beginning. They're about to leave. They shouldn't leave without borrowing from their neighbors, from their friends. And the pasuk continues, and he says, the Eibishter made the Egyptians very disposed, very willing, very ready, very happy to share their wealth with the Jewish people. Then you have in Kapitel Yud Beis, pasuk Lamed Hey. It's a whole kapitel later. That after Makas B'Chodesh, and the Pari is running around and saying, Heichan Moshe God, Heichan Aaron God. Remember that when we were children, they told us about Aaron Pari's, his pajamas with the pom-pom and the polka dots. Remember he ran, everybody's got an account of what kind of pajamas Pari was wearing. And he ran through the streets screaming, where does Moshe live? Where does Aaron live? Ein bayas asher ein shameis. There was no home. There was not a dead body. And he found Moshe's kum, get out, go, 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 gate. And the Yidden had taken their time. Why? They had a job to do. Uvenei Yisrael, pasuk lamed hey and pasuk lamed vav. Uvenei Yisrael asu kedvar Moshe. The Jewish people did as Moshe said. Vayishalu mi Mitzrayim, they borrowed from Egypt, klei kaseh v'klei zav, silver utensils and golden utensils, but it adds one more word which did not say in the beginning. Usmalis, and material clothes. Rashi says that in that ancient world, an outfit made from silk or linen was more valuable than gold because of the primitive nature of the technology, and they borrowed clothing as well. Go ahead.
Why does it say borrow and not take?
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. That's the whole Vatera. And the next pasuk says again, Vashem nosan eschein ha'am be'enei Mitzrayim. The Eibishter gave that the Egyptians found the Jewish people very likable, a lot of chein. Vayishalu, and they gave it to them. However, they gave it to them. They gave it to them as a loan, gave it to them as a gift, as I'll see soon. Vayenatzlu et Mitzrayim. They emptied Mitzrayim. They made it bare. On these words, Vayenatzlu et Mitzrayim, there's a Chazal, I think it's a Gemara. As uha kimitzula she'ein badogim ukimitzuda she'ein badogim. They made it like the deep of the sea, which has no fish, and like a bird trap that has no more seeds, no more bait. They emptied Mitzrayim. This is the story. 4 psukim. Hashem wanted that the Yidden should borrow, and the Egyptians found chen, they found grace towards the Jewish people, and they emptied Mitzrayim.
The 3 things Jews kept over the entire time they were in Mitzrayim was their names, language, and clothes. Why is it not technical clothes?
Okay, I don't know. Now, so there's so many things about the story that are odd. The one that borrows the Jews is, the oldest story in the book. The Jews are a bunch of thieves. We borrowed, we left, we stole it from, they tricked them. Yeah, so that's really one of the key points of this Dvar Torah. But there's a couple of other things that are very, very important in this story that are really important to point out. The first is, since when does the Jews and the Egyptians friends? They enslaved them so cruelly.
God made them.
The slavery was so bad. All of a sudden, Ish me Esre Eyu, Isha me Esre Usa, they're talking to their friends and neighbors as if they're chum, buddy. So a lot of the Mefarshim Taka say that when the Makis started to happen, and the fortune of the Mitzrayim started to turn, so from the bottom up, not from the bottom, from the person on the street, the Egyptians suddenly decided, maybe we should be their friends. Maybe we should earn for a few good points. I don't know if you know this. And it is a good comparison, even though it's hard to fathom, but at the end of the Second World War, there were many Nazis who went out of their way to help Jews because they knew what was coming. They knew there was going to be a prosecution. And they were hoping that they were going to be treated a little bit more favorably because they could bring a witness that the last 4 days of the death march, they gave a little boy coffee. Rabbi Nissen Mangelzel Zangesundstag, he's 90 years old. Marched on the death march for weeks in February 1945. It was one of the coldest winters on record. They were walking in pajamas. They gave them no food and no drink. All they ate was snow. He says nobody should have survived, not one. He says the miracle of Jewish survival on the death march is unimaginable. He was 14. And he was falling apart. He was starving. He was freezing. And many times he wanted to step out of the line. You stepped out of the line, they shot you, it was over. And every morning a Nazi officer came and gave him a thermos of coffee every day with sugar and milk. At the end of the march, he gave him coffee. He said, I'm sorry, I have no sugar. He gave him coffee. Kept him alive. So Rabbi Mangel talks about this story and he muses, was this guy, Ambashta Malach, who saved his life? Or was he a Nazi who was trying to save his own life? Because he never saw the man again. He never saw him again. Never saw him again. Never had to testify for him or against him. He never saw him again. But this is Rashi's. A lot of them Mefarshim say all of a sudden the Mitzrayim are Yidden's friends. Was machst du? Good morning. How's the weather? Maybe you need some help shoveling your snow. After decades of the worst kind of torture, I compared the 86 years of slavery in Egypt to 86 years of Auschwitz. There were people who lived in Auschwitz for 5 years and survived. But you know what they looked like after 5 years? You know what they felt like after 5 years? Mitzrayim was so cruel. The Golos Mitzrayim was so cruel. All of a sudden, they're buddies. What do you want? Good morning. The mood, the Egyptians push it in Pshute Shal Mikra. We're trying to save their own skin. So they became Yidden's friends. This is one thing that's very important to observe in this story. And the other is this chen. All of a sudden, Yidden had this likability factor. The Goyim liked him. They saw some in the Yidden that make them like him. After you treat people, not for days, weeks, or months, for generations, so cruelly, all of a sudden there's this chen. I always tell you this in my classes. Chen is an intangible. You can't explain chen, right? What does chen mean? Chen means you have a likability factor. One person walks into a room and everyone says, "Ich." What ich? You never met him. I don't know. I have a bad feeling about that guy, Another person walks through him and says, "Ooh, I like that guy." But you never met him. I know, but there's something about him. That's what chen is. Yidden, after all of this suffering, at the last moment, there's a chen, there's a graciousness, there's something, there's an aura about the Yidden that makes the Mitzrayim want, not just that the Yidden should like him. They want to help him out. And it sets up the she'ela. It sets up the borrowing or the asking, depending on the different versions of how we understand what actually happened in Egypt at that time. And of course, the culmination of it all is Moshe. If the Egyptians had enemy number one, if there was anybody Egypt should have been angry with, it was Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? They had this factory of slaves. The Mitzrayim had a factory of slaves for decades, for generations. They were building these big fortresses, these big cities of treasure and so on and so forth. And then this Moshe Rabbeinu comes out of nowhere. He stirs the pot. He messes with parei. He brings 10 makis. If there's anybody that the Mitzrayim should hate, it should Moshe Rabbeinu. So the pasuk says not only was there a chen, was there a feeling of lovability, of grace, but the Goyim were enchanted with Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu ruined their whole They're a whole business model. They had an endless supply of free slaves, slave labor. And Moshe Rabbeinu ruined it. Somehow Moshe Rabbeinu is walking around and the average guy likes him. Not respects him, not fears him, likes him. Gadol me'ed. Moshe Rabbeinu was so great. It says in some of the Midrashim, Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely humble, but extremely rich. Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely humble, but he was so well respected. When Moshe Rabbeinu heard this nevuah from the Eibishter, he ran into the street screaming, the Gadol is described as Moshe's excitement in anticipation of the Geula. But a significant part of that is the Chen. The Ramban points out that when Moshe told the Yidden that they should borrow, they didn't borrow right away. They went to talk to the shmooze, to the neighbors. That's all. To hang out with the neighbors. To create friendship, to create Chen. They borrowed literally on the way out the door. After Makas B'chodesh, the next morning, the morning of the 15th of Nisan, when they were already leaving, he said, can I take this? Can I take this? Can I take this? And the Mitzrayim gave them more than they asked for. So there's these 2 points that are interesting. Number one, all of a sudden the Goyim are friends with Yidden. And number 2, the Yidden have a chen. The Yidden have a factor of likability. They like them. It's very hard to explain why, but the Eibishter did it. Hashem nosan as chen. The Eibishter gave a chen, a grace, so that the Egyptians would lend the Jewish people their wealth. But now comes, of course, the most important question of all. How do you translate the word she'ela? Shin Aleph Lamed Hey. Now, for those of you who learn Sri Prakam Layim and Rambam, so today we're learning Hilchas Teyam and Nitten. Before Teyam and Nitten, we did something very torturous called Malva V'Leiva. But before Malva V'Leiva, we had something called Shaila Upikod. Shaila means to borrow. And most people assume that the meaning of the word Vayishalu means they borrowed. But if you look at the Rishonim, and this isn't even from a Rish, this is from one of the Go'onim, Rabbeinu Hananel, who wrote a Pirush and Chumash that we do not have, but we have bits and pieces of his Pirush that are brought in the Rishonim. Rabbeinu Hananel lived about 1200 years ago. Rabbeinu Hananel translates the word Vayishalu, they should ask for, not borrow. They weren't borrowing, they were saying, give me. No, borrowing means I have to give it back. Yeah. Asking for it means I'm asking for a gift. And the Rashbam, one of the earliest Rishonim, was the grandson of Rashi, agrees with this Rabbeinu Hananel, and there were others who say the same thing, that the meaning of the word Vayishalu was not to borrow. They never meant to borrow it. They said, give me a gift, give me a parting gift. Give me one gift, give me a second gift, give me a third gift, give me a fourth gift. And the Mitzrayim were exceedingly generous in giving these gifts. Hard to know why. They were friends. Yidden had chen. They thought maybe it would serve them well. But there is a whole approach of the Rishonim that say that they were never borrowing. They were taking gifts. Give me. And of course, the way that story unfolds, it unfolds no matter what. They would say, give me this, give me this, give me this. And the Mitzri would say, how do you know I have this? He says, how do I know you have this? I wandered through your house during Makas Choshech. You were sitting like a glump, like a stone. And I could have taken anything I wanted from your home because I was able to see where I was walking. You couldn't walk, you couldn't move, you couldn't, if you were standing, you couldn't sit. If you sit, you couldn't stand. And I left it. Give it to me. So the Chazal say that when Yidden would bait the Egyptians this way, not only would they give them what they saw, they would give them even what they didn't see. Take another one. Till today, take 2. There was a really strange kind of approach, considering the fact that the Jews were asking for it, they were not borrowing it. And there's a whole approach in the Rishonim that says that the purpose of this Vayishalu was to ask for gifts, and the Egyptians gave them. One of the Rishonim, just for example,
was there a time for was it after the king?
Well, Rashi says, I mean, the foundational thing is the thing I started with. Right. That Rashi says that Daber no ba'ozdei ha'am, speak to the people, please. That because I promised Avraham Avinu they're going to be slaves for 400 years. But this is a Gemara. They're going to go on great wealth. I don't want Avraham Avinu to say that the v'inu arbe esam inu v'adu esam kiyim. With Chush God like him, Hashem says, if you don't take wealth from Egypt, Avraham is going to have a taina to me. The Eibishter needed, that the Yidden should ask for these gifts. He said, please, I need you to do this because I promised Avraham Avinu that the Yidden are going to take a Rechush Gadol. But that's also weird. I mean, and the Golus Mitzrayim isn't weird. The whole thing is, what do you need suffering for? But this is only one approach. That they asked. Go ahead.
I think I heard you say a few times that they cleaned them out.
But not so. They did it this morning.
Yeah, but isn't there, I don't know if it's a measure, but when the chariots and everything came, and then they got swept in the sea, and the sea washed up a bunch of...
You have to, it's a good question that you're asking. And you have to say the pshat that Yenatzlu, when they emptied them out in Mitzrayim, it's including what they were going to take later. Especially because it says in the Midrashim, it says beferish the Midrashim, that the Boiz Hayam, what they took at the sea, was more than they borrowed. So you have to say that the Vayenatzlu is not just describing what happened then, but what's going to happen later. The Chizkuni says like this. The Chizkuni says that there's another way of understanding Yishalu. That Vayishalu does not mean to ask, Vayishalu means dafka to borrow. Dafka to borrow. To borrow. And borrowing means you have to pay back. And of course, borrowing in order to pay back right away puts Yidden behind an 8 ball. You know, you took our wealth, you ran away, a bunch of ganovim, you know, bunch of thieves, you took our wealth, you ran off on us. I mean, everybody calls the Jews ganovim. Every chance they get, we call us thieves, yeah. Here you have a case that the Chizkuni says, one opinion says, the one that I told you, thank you very much, that they said, ask for it, which is as an earlier Rishonim, which is a very beautiful way of explaining the story. But there's no dafka to borrow. You know why they wanted to borrow? Because they wanted that they shouldn't return it, and the Egyptians should get upset, and they should chase after them. The borrowing was a form of baiting, because the story wasn't finished. The story wasn't finished. The story wasn't finished. If you say that the Jews came to their Egyptian neighbor and said, give me a gift, a parting gift, fine. You take the gift, you go, it's over. There's another opinion that says, no, do not ask for a gift. Insist on borrowing it and give the impression you're going to pay it back because I want him to chase you. So the Chizkuni writes, there's another element of betochen in this second version. Why? The Jews experienced trauma. The Jews experienced trauma. You know anything about trauma? Huh? If you were 9, and there was a kid in your class who was a bully, who used to make fun of you and beat you up. Now you're 30 and he's 30. And he's 5'6" and out of shape and a schlepper. And you're 6'4" and you work out. And you could crush him like a mosquito. When you see him, you're going to be afraid of him. That's the Taich trauma. He's in your head. And you have to get it out. When he was a little kid, he was a bully. Now he's a nothing. When you were a little kid, you were a sweet little boy. Now you're a tough guy. When you see somebody who bullied you as a child, you think twice. Because he's in your psyche. He's in your psyche. He's in your subconscious. The Jews in Egypt had plenty of trauma. So if the Abisha says, ask. Okay, you take a gift, you go. Borrow means what? I got to pay it back. We're going to remain connected. And the Yidden said, oh no, I'll take it for free, but I'm not going to borrow it. You know that in halacha it says, giving tzedakah is a big thing. Giving a gemilas chesed, that means a loan, is a much bigger thing. If somebody needs money, can you give me some money? Sure, here's $1, $100. No, I want you to lend me $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000. Listen, I'll give you 1,000, but I'm not lending you 5,000. Why? Because if you lend a person money, you and that person are connected till he pays his debt. And if the guy's a nudnik, the guy's one of those people who never thinks in terms of paying debts. I don't know if you guys know my cliches, but one of my famous cliche lines, and there's a lot more truth to this than meets the eye. Don't forget this one, okay? When you're a businessman, when you're a shliach, there's only 2 types of money in this world. There's 2 types of money in this world. The money that's in my pocket and the money that's not in my pocket. Not the money that's mine and not mine. The money that's in my pocket, even if it's not mine, And if it's mine and it's not in my pocket, it's also not mine. You have no idea how much psychological truth there is to that fact. The worst thing is to give somebody else your money and you expect it back. If you don't expect it back, no. But you connect it to that you know who until he pays his loans. The guy's a schlepper. He has no respect for money, he has no respect for people, he has no respect for himself. To get the money out of him, here, take the money, go, I don't want you to owe me. So Torah says, Gedela, Gemilas Chasadim, Yesim in Tzedakah. Gemilas Chasadim is where they tzedakah. Why? Because it binds people. And the Chazal say, of course, that Gemilas Chasadim could be for the rich, not only for the poor, and tzedakah is only for the poor. When Hashem said, according to the first Pirush, that Hashem says you didn't ask for gifts, that's no problem. Alone, I'm going to be tethered to that Yemach Shemoy. I'm going to be attached to that Egyptian who tortured me 5 years ago, who hit me with a stick because I produced one brick short because I didn't have any straw. I'm going to be tethered to him because I'm going to have to borrow. And Hashem says, please, I beg you, borrow. Don't take, borrow. So there's a very big psychological game going on here. For Yidden to take is easier than to borrow. Besides for the ethics, besides for the question of paying back, there's the idea that they're going to be attached to the Egyptians. And Hashem says, I want to tell you why I want you to borrow. Because you're going to borrow, and you're going to leave, and you're not going to come back, and you're not going to pay your debts, and they're going to come after you. And the Jews say, that's exactly what I'm afraid of. Even though there were 10 Makkahs, even though the Yidden were winning, Mitzrayim was losing, but psychologically, the Egyptians were in the Yidden's heads and hearts. The trauma was real. And Hashem says, trust me. Let them chase you. Because your real victory is only going to come when they chase after you. For two reasons. The one you gave. That there's going to be even more wealth available to you when they chase you to the Yam. In addition, you're going to wipe them out. They're going to chase you into the sea and they're all going to drown. And then you're going to have trauma from dead people, you understand? You're not going to have trauma from people left behind in Egypt. They're going to be fini, they're going to be gone. So this is the deeper pshat, the Cheskuni says. The simple pshat is ask for a gift and go. Hashem says, no, don't ask for a gift, ask for a loan. Why? I want you to be connected to the Mitzri as you leave. And I want the Mitzri to be connected to you as you leave. Why? I want him to chase you. And the Yidden say, are you crazy? Haven't we suffered enough? And Hashem says, trust me on this one. Trust me on this one. I get 10 makkahs, yeah. I got you out of Egypt. The lashon that he uses is chua. Use the lashon chua. The real salvation is only going to come when they chase after you. So the Torah tells us that the Jews borrowed. They didn't just ask for gifts, the Jews borrowed. And some of the Rishonim say the hardest thing was to borrow. It would have been a lot easier to ask because they were intimidated by Mitzrayim. But they listened to the Eibishter. Hashem gave them chen, Hashem made them friends. But the Jews trusted the Eibishter and they borrowed because this is what the Eibishter wanted. And it's one of the big schusim of the Yidden. Go ahead.
Isn't it lying?
Huh?
Isn't it lying if you say they're borrowing and you know that they're not giving it back?
Yeah. The Eibush told him to lie. The Eibush told him to lie. No, it's not a chsiddush genev, it's a getlich genev. I don't know how to answer you. I'm going to tell you a Gemara now. A Gemara, but okay, forget about it. I wasn't going to say it in this order, but because of your question, there's a very famous Gemara, which the Rebbe once by Fabrengen talked about, that it happened, I think, in Chav Hei Sivan. That Alexander the Great, took over the whole world. It's a Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin, Tav Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph, but it's also a Medrash in Bereishis Rabbah with different shinuyim. That Alexander was going to conquer the whole world. One of the places he conquered was Eretz Yisrael. And if you know the history of Alexander's Mugdon, there is no record at all of what happened in Israel. We know Alexander's route. He left northern Greece, Macedonia, where he lived, and he went down through Turkey, and he came down into what is now Lebanon, Phoenicia, Tyre. He went through Israel, he went into Egypt, he conquered Egypt, and he went due east, till India. We know exactly his route. And we know the wars that he fought in each place. In some places he fought wars, in some places the people let them in. He was a political animal. He was also an evil man. There is no record in the Goyish history of what happened in Israel, except that we know that he went by Israel, and that when he left, Israel remained intact, the Beis HaMikdash remained intact, the Kohen Gadol remained intact. So there's a Gemara about this also, but this is a different Gemara, that the Mitzrayim and the Knaanim came to Alexander's Mugdon to collect the debt. Alexander was the king of the whole world, very powerful man, and he made laws like all kings do, and they sued Eretz Yisrael for the Rechush Gadol. This is the answer to your question. They sued Eretz Yisrael for the great wealth, that the Mitzrayim, that Canaanim claimed, their claim. So the Yidden were in a bit of a bind. I mean, Alexander's Mugdon was no tzaddik. So there was a man named Gviya ben Pesisa, his name is mentioned in the Gemara. In the Medrash, his name is Gviya ben Koisim. And Gviya ben Pesisa came to the Chachamim and he said to the Chachamim as follows: I'm a nobody. Let me speak for the Jews. If I lose, you'll say I'm a nobody. And if I win, we'll win. So he came into this courtroom, and the Mitzrayim are claiming that the Jews took from them who knows how much wealth. Especially if they borrowed it. The Ganovim, they're liars. So Gviya ben Pesisa said, how many Jews lived in Egypt? Then he gave him a number. How many generations live in Egypt? They gave him a number. How many labor hours did Egypt have from the Yidden over the course of those years of slavery? Millions of hours. How much were the Yidden paid? He said, you got a deal. Let's talk business. You give us an approximate amount of how much we took when we left. We'll give you an approximate amount of what you owe for the hours of labor. And we'll exchange the difference. We'll exchange the difference. So Alexander Mugdon wouldn't back away. In other words, nobody asked him to come to court. But once they came to court, the judge was going to see it through. And the judge turns to Egypt and says, okay, let's get the accountants. So you know what happened. The Gemara says they ran off and they left fields full of food, and it was the Matzah Shvius. Yidden had no food because of Shemitah, and they left empty fields and wealth on Ashir for the Jewish people. The Jewish people were lying. The Jewish people were lying. The Jewish people were lying. The Eibusha told them to borrow and not to ask because he wanted to complete the story. And the Yidden had Mesiras Nefesh to do it. But that's the answer to your question. He said, this is the story. Go ahead.
I don't know if you're talking, but if someone borrows from another person and that entire person's bloodline gets wiped out.
So halachically, you have to give it to tzedakah.
Yeah?
Sure. I mean, there's a classic example of that. Gezel HaGeir, if you steal from a Geir, he has no family, he has no bloodline. So you have to give it to the Koyanim. There's a whole halacha. Whatever the halachas are, I don't want to go into it. Whatever, I'm speaking incorrectly. There is such a discussion in halacha. But you see, all of this explains how the Jews are friends. It explains the chayin. It explains the asking. It explains the borrowing. But who needs it? What's this rechush gadol? What is this rechush gadol? Why is it so important to the Eibishter? That first of all, he mentions it to Avraham Avinu 430 years earlier. Avraham Avinu was told Bris Ben Absarim when he was 70 years old. The 400 years start from when Avraham is 100 years old, because Yitzchak is born. And the 400 years in the birth, 430 years before Yidden leave Mitzrayim, Hashem says to Avraham Avinu, don't worry, when they leave, they're going to take great wealth. All Avraham Avinu was thinking, imagine being a tzaddik like Avraham Avinu. with Ruach HaKodesh. Holy people live a very rich life. Their life is full of light, full of holiness. And all of a sudden, Avraham is filled with a darkness that's vile. That's how it's described in Parshas Lech Lecha. Avraham Avinu feels the worst kind of anger come over him. And he's thinking, what's going on? And the Eibishter tells him, this is the story of your children. Thank you very much. And of course, especially when you learn in the Midrashim, that he actually represented Egla Mishlesh, Ez Mishulash, Ayal Mishulash, all four Goliaths are represented in the Bris Bein Absarim, not just Mitzrayim. And Avraham Avinu is devastated to hear how much his children are going to suffer. The Eibishter throws him a couple of bones. The first bone is, when you die, your life is going to be perfect. Avraham dies 5 years early, so he shouldn't see Asa become a Rasha. You understand? That's one bone. And the other bone is, who needs a Chush Gadol? So of course, this is where Chassidus comes into the story. And Chassidus considers it very important to explain the business of the Rechush Gadol. So let's, I don't have a lot of time, but let's talk. Number one, Golus Mitzrayim was not suffrage. Hashem did not put Yidden Mitzrayim to make them suffer. That's not the point. Golus Mitzrayim was a melting pot that created the Jewish nation. Until Golus Mitzrayim, there were individual Jews. And to be a Jew, you had to be a tzaddik. If a Jew was a Rosh, he was Oif Yid. The birth of the Jewish nation makes it so that the biggest tzaddik and the biggest Rasha and everybody in between are equally Jewish. This process of becoming a nation of Jews required fire. It required a purging. It required a melting pot. That was Golus Mitzrayim, to create the identity not of individual Jews, but the family of Jews, the nation of Israel, the union, the achdus of Klal Yisrael as a unity, as a one entity. But there's more. And the more is that never is Jewish suffering just to suffer. Never is Jewish suffering to suffer, even if the suffering is going to make him into a nation. And that's the Rechush Gadol. The Rechush Gadol is explained in Chassidus so much that the Eibishter put sparks in the world, all over the place. The sparks that the Eibishter put in the world are holiness. They're holy. And they come down to a level even of physical wealth. And the Eibishter says, wherever Yidden go, there's the Ve'achere Chen Yetzu B'Rechush Gadol. Yidden never go to a place and just go away. They take the wealth. There's a pasuk in Ha'azinu which has caused Jewish people a lot of trouble. The pasuk says, Hein am levadad yishkei uvagoyim lo yischashav. Balak, thank you. Oh, you're good. Hein am levadad yishkei uvagoyim lo yischashav. What does that mean? Wherever Jews go, there's great wealth. Wherever Jews go, there's great wealth. And when they leave, they take the wealth with them. But by Goyim lo yischashav, all the wealth that Yidden have, because they were associated with Goyim, is not in the Yiddish cheshbon. There's a separate cheshbon of Hamam Lavadad Yishkein, the Yid's own wealth. Do you know that the Alter Rebbe said once that over the course of Golos, Jews were moving from country to country. And wherever Jews went, if you know the history of the Golos, in the beginning of this Golos, we were in Asia Minor, we were in Bavel, we were in Iraq. Then we moved to North Africa, to Spain. And then eventually moved to Western Europe, based off to France, to Germany, the Low Countries. And then we moved east, we moved to Poland, to Russia, to Hungary, to Romania, to Bulgaria, to these countries. Wherever the Jews were, those countries were the richest. And when the Jews leave, so the Alter Rebbe said that when Jews had to leave Western Europe and go to Eastern Europe, the Malachim of the Goyish nation said, we're not taking them. We don't want their bee and we don't want their sting. Why? Wherever the Yidden come, You rise and you fall. And when you leave, the Jews take the wealth. So Poland said, you know what? I'll take it. A couple of 100 years of wealth, I'll take it. We'll take the Jews. But there's a condition. The Jews have to give the Polish government, the Malach of Poland said, a pile of gold as tall as a horse and a rider. So the Alter Rebbe said in his times, when the king of Poland asks for Jews to give unfair taxes, the Jews have to pay it because that's the rent to live in Poland. You have to pay it. The Alter Rebbe said you have to pay it. There's a vort. When Yidden come to a place, there's something happening for Yidden, but there's something happening to the place. The Rechush Gadol Kinderlach is the Kedusha that is in that place. And when Yidden leave, they take the wealth, they take the Kedusha. You know that the Rebbe said, I saw the Rebbe say it, so sharp, so pointed. You know, the Rebbe is such a sweet man, but every once in a while you see the Rebbe come out. A Yid named Ronnie Lauder, a very, very wealthy man, came to the Rebbe with Rabbi Chaskel Besser, who was a big Machan Agudas Yisrael, that they wanted to rebuild the Jewish community in Poland. Before the Holocaust, Poland had, I think, 3 million Jews or 4 million Jews. Now there's a few thousand Jews all over Poland. And they wanted to bring Jews back into Poland. They had a whole plan. In the big cities, Lublin and Varsha and Kroke, they'd build yeshivas and koilelim. And then Luther looks straight at them and says very directly, I see no future for the Jewish people in Poland. You have to help the Jews over there, but don't bring Jews back into Poland. The Rebbe didn't say it about Russia. The Rebbe didn't even say it about Germany. But he said it about Poland. Whatever we got out of Poland, we finished. Poland, gendikt, you know. It's like Yidden left Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu says, never go back. Lo say sifun. There's nothing to go back for. Because whatever treasure, whatever spiritual wealth, which is represented by the Rechush Gadol that Mitzrayim has, Yidden took. This is the job of Yidden. Yidden go from a country to a country. And we elevate sparks. Now the elevation of sparks may happen through suffering. It may happen through slavery. It may happen through all kinds of ways. But when Yidden come to a place and they serve Hashem, they learn Torah, and they do mitzvahs with great sacrifice, they elevate those sparks. So Hashem says to Moshe, if the Yidden don't take the wealth, they're going to have to go back to get it. They're going to have to go back and get it. Because this wealth is Yidden's. Not it's Yidden's because it's Yidden's, not Goyim. It's because it's Kedusha, not Klippa. Do you know that the Mitzrayim Maggid said on the Pasuk, Vahi b'shalach parei es ha'om, which is next week. So it says in Midrashim, the Mitzrayim Maggid brings down, Vahi b'shalach parei sent along with the people. What did he send along with the people? Whatever sparks the Yidden forgot to take, Parei said, you forgot of you, take them. The Rechush Gadol the Yidden took from Mitzrayim is not just money. It's the Kedusha sparks that exist in each country in the world. And in Mitzrayim there were many of them, as one of you mentioned, Yosef HaTzadik's treasure and so on. And the Yidden's taking that treasure was the end of the beat. If Yidden don't take wealth out of Mitzrayim, they're going to have to go back. Hashem says take every penny. Because you have to elevate Mitzrayim. There's other galuyos, there's other journeys, there's other sparks that need to be elevated. You're leaving Egypt, it shouldn't just be the birth of a nation. It should be the correction of Egypt. You must take that wealth. This is why it's so important for the Eibishter that the Yidden should ask and borrow. Like I said to you, because when they borrow, the Egyptians follow them. And when the Egyptians followed them, the wealth that the Yidden take lechatchila, the Egyptians gave them at the Yam. Because otherwise, they're going to have to go back to Mitzrayim and elevate it. And there's a small diuk in Chassidus. I'm going to finish with this diuk. The Lashon Gemara is, I think it's a Gemara. Rashi brings it in Chumash. They made it like the depth of the sea that has no fish, and like a bird trap that has no more bait, has no more seeds. So Chassidus explains that there are two kinds of worlds. There's hidden worlds and revealed worlds. The ocean, the Yam, is a mashal for the hidden worlds. The dry land is a mashal for the revealed worlds. So Chassidus explains, As'ua kimitzula, she'ein ba'daga. They made it like the deep that has no fish. They elevated all the sparks of Egypt in the Madrega where Egypt is hidden, Alma Deskasya. Vas'ua kimitzuda, she'ein ba'dogyan. They made it like a trap that has no longer any bait, any seeds, to represent the sparks of Alma Desgalia. And that's the real issue of the Vayishalom. The real issue of Yishlu was Yidden went to Mitzrayim. And they're leaving Mitzrayim. And the Eibishter is saying to the Yidden, I would really hate for you to have to come back here again. And the only way for you not to come back here again is because whatever you took from the Rishus of Klip and brought into the Rishus of Kedusha, you have to take with you. And that's represented by this wealth. And just to finish, it says in Chumash, there's 3 different places in the Torah where it says, you're not allowed to live in Mitzrayim. The Rambam brings it to Halacha, you're not allowed to live in Mitzrayim. The great Rambam in his Chuvas used to sign his name, Moshe ben Maimon, who lives in Cairo, an old, whatever it was, old Cairo, Ha'oiver shloisha lavim b'chol yom, who's transgressing 3 negative commandments every day because of the 3 psukim that says you're not allowed to live in Mitzrayim. Why was he living in Mitzrayim? Because he was a sakana to live any place else. The Rambam was a marked man, you understand? But that's what he says. So that's the real issue of the Rechush Gadol. And that's the V'yishalu, Daber no, please. I would hate for Yidden to leave Mitzrayim and have to come back again. And that's the pshat, in my opinion. When the Rebbe said, I see no future for the Jewish people in Poland, I believe personally that the Rebbe holds that Polish and is still anti-Semites. And he doesn't want Jews in Poland. But I think on a mystical level, there's no sparks. Whatever sparks we had in Poland, we took it. There's other sparks to take, ready for Mashiach to come. Any questions or comments?
We've been living in Eretz Yisrael for the past 3,000 years, pretty much uninterrupted.
That's not true. That's really not true.
There hasn't been a constant Jewish presence?
First of all, no. After the Churban, there were no Jews.
At all? Huh?
At all. Why do you think we made a calendar?
A what?
A calendar.
Oh, because it couldn't.
They kicked the Jews out of Egypt. As long as Jews stayed in Egypt, they were Makadosh Chesed Piriya.
How long was the interval between when there were...
A few hundred years. It was called the Aryan Christians, the early Christians. They kicked every Jew out of Israel. Probably from the 2nd century to the 5th century, there were 0 Jews in Israel. Something like that.
So out of the past 3,000 years...
Then they trickled in, but never a very large. There were, in the Managolus, the community of Jews in Israel was quite small. Israel was destroyed by Genghis Khan, by the Mongols. Destroyed. In other words, even if there was a land to live in the 10th century, the 11th century, when they came through, they made it into a desert. And for hundreds of years, to live in Israel, you had to literally bring bread from another country. So there has been a yishuv of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael.
But we have been living there longer than any other country, right?
But not in a very large community. 200 years ago, how many Jews were in the whole Israel? A few thousand. Now there's millions. There's more Jews in Israel than any place in the world. But it wasn't always that way. Anyway, what was your question? I didn't let you.
So collectively, just throughout, like, so if you want to also, what's it called, count the years of, like, when we had the Beis Hamikdash and we were all living there and stuff, we've definitely been living inside of it.
More than any place else.
More than any place. So you don't think we've collected all the sparks?
Ah, you see, Israel, we don't live in to elevate sparks. Israel, we live in because it's a holy land. It's not about the sparks, it's about the holiness. What do you think is going to happen when Mashiach comes?
Israel's going to expand.
The whole world is going to heal. Every nation, Goyish nation is going to heal. The sparks that we took, we're going to keep because they're Israel sparks. But their choil, their ordinary, is going to heal. I have a whole philosophy about this, but you don't have time to tell you right now. Okay, good enough.